to say we're so happy that you're here. And I'd like to introduce you to, she's my friend, but she's also our board president here at the San Francisco Center for the Book, Meryl Macklin. She's so much fun, and she just gets so excited whenever she comes to visit us here at San Francisco Center for the Book. So without further ado, I'm going to spotlight her and let her tell us about her her artistic and creative journey.
Thanks, Cheryl. So as Cheryl said, I'm the chair of the board, and I do love the Center for the Book. So everybody who's on, who has been there and is part of this community, thank you for all that you do for the center. When Sarah first asked me whether I would do a shelter in studio and would show my studio, I said, "You mean the corner of my living room and my bathroom?" And she said, "Well, you know, that's what people have." And so in a few minutes, you'll be able to see the bathroom, but I'm right now in the corner of the living room, and you can see my sewing machine to my right. I'm not a book artist. I'm not sure I think of myself as an artist at all. I'm a lawyer in my day job. I am definitely not a cinematographer, so you are going to see not a beautiful filming today. I'm going to do the best I can to show you what I've got here, but I am challenged because to my right is a gigantic window that is 17 feet long and 14 feet high, and that inhibits my ability to show you what's going on here because it just blows out everything. So what I do is mainly focused on textiles, and I thought I would start by just giving a little brief description of how I came to where I am, my journey, if you will, to the textile work that I do today. I started sewing in high school. They used to teach home ec, and we learned how to sew. And my parents told me they would buy me a sewing machine once I took home ec, and they did. And I did quite a bit of sewing in high school, and then did none after that for many years, to the point where I was lugging around a big, heavy 1970s all metal sewing machine, and decided I really there was no point to that anymore, and I should get rid of it, something I came to regret not that long after that, actually. So that was about 25 years ago, and about 20 years ago, I learned how to knit. And that was the beginning of where I got to today, because even though I was a terrible knitter when I first started, I absolutely loved the process. And I just kept forging ahead until I got better at it and wanted to learn more and more about knitting. And a few years after that, one of the shops that I was following on the internet started doing some quilting. So I thought, well, that's interesting. Let me see if I can haul out a sewing machine from somewhere and start sewing. And I bought a very cheap sewing machine at the time from Sears, which still existed at the time. I think it barely does now. And it didn't really work very well, but it worked well enough for me to realize, yeah, I wanted to sew. And so I then started buying progressively higher and higher end sewing machines until I had what I have here today, which has a computer inside of it, and also will do all kinds of fancy things on its own. I used to joke it does everything but buy the fabric for me. And mainly, I don't really need such fancy sewing machine because what I do is a straight stitch, and can do that on pretty much any sewing machine. So once I figured that out, I started buying more sewing machines, and I have quite a number of them now, which is not uncommon for people who get into sewing. I have 4 or 5 antique sewing machines, mainly because they look good, but I do have one that I really like that I take to classes or to retreats. That's a Singer 301. Otherwise known as a slant needle. And I think mine is from the early 50s, but that came into production sometime, I think in the early 50s. And before then, there was what many people know as the Singer Featherweight, very portable. I have a couple of those for show. I don't really use those. And then I have a fantastic straight stitch machine, which if you spend any time in dry cleaners and looking at alterations professionals they use, it's a Juki, and all that does is go straight back and forth. And I take those machines with me when I go to workshops or retreats, because this one here weighs about 40, 45 pounds, and with all the electronics in it, it's a little dicey to start driving that around in a car. So I've done quite a bit of quilting over the last, I'd say 10, 15 years. And as with the knitting, I just kept wanting to learn more and more about it. So when I started, I laugh at it now, because when I started, I thought, okay, this is going to be my relaxing craft. I'm just going to do, I won't care about perfection or complication or trickiness. I'm just going to sew pieces of fabric together. Well, that's ridiculous, as you'll see in a few minutes, because now, of course, that's the way I am. I wanted to learn more and more complicated and tricky things. And I do that in my sewing now, as well as in my knitting. In addition to that, I then became one of these people, and they're actually quite common in the textile world, maybe not as common in the book arts world. I became one of those people who needed to learn how to do everything. So anything I hadn't yet learned how to do, I wanted to know. So I took a lot of classes in embroidery. I've taken some simple sewing classes, like simple hand sewing classes like sashiko. I've all the way up to really complicated bobbin lace making. For a while, I was saying I was specializing in 17th century crafts. The bobbin lace making is really like head exploding, I have to tell you. I've tried and largely failed to learn how to crochet. And at this point, I primarily love to do hand sewing, knitting, quilting. And then recently, what has really become a passion of mine is, and I'm going to use these, I debated whether to say it this way or whether to say plant dyeing, but I'm going to say natural dyeing, which I can see my mother on the screen laughing about this, because when you say to people, oh, yes, I'm taking a class in natural dyeing, they don't quite know what to say. I mean, they think, well, is this like a hemlock class? Like, what exactly are you doing? Is this an end of life kind of situation? But no, it's using plants and sometimes some animals. There are some mollusks and insects that also will give color, but mainly plants is what I've used. And I started doing that probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and just kind of dipped my toes into it. And more recently, I've gotten very, very involved in it. During the pandemic, I started dyeing all the flowers that I bought at the grocery store, and seeing what kind of colors they would give, and mostly yellow, by the way, even if it looks like they might not, it's mostly yellow. But I also will purchase natural dyes, things like madder, logwood, pomegranate, indigo, of course, that's the one that is the most common. In a minute, I'm going to show you kind of where all my stuff is. But one of the things I didn't take a picture of is where all the dyeing stuff is, because it's kind of tucked away in a closet. I got a lot of big pots, 22-gallon pots that I just work on the kitchen stove over in the corner there. I've been trying lately to spend more time learning, really trying to learn how to control what it is that I'm doing with the dyeing. And so I'm going to be doing an intensive workshop this summer on indigo with a friend of mine who lives down in Aptos, and unlike me, has a backyard. And so I can spend time with her in the backyard working on indigo. Indigo, for those who have used it, is not something you would want to do in a city apartment, which is where I'm sitting right now, because everything in your apartment will be blue. The floors, the bathtub, everything, and it is really hard to get out of things. So that's done outdoors. So that's who I am and what I do kind of artistically. And now I want to show you some of the stuff in my house, and some of it I'm going to be able to show you on the screen, and some I've put together. And as I said earlier, not much of a cinematographer, so we'll see how well it goes, but I put together some pictures of some other parts of my apartment. I live in San Francisco at the base of Potrero Hill, actually conveniently about 8 blocks away from the center, which is really nice for me because I can pop over there really whenever I want to. And it's my proximity to the center actually that got me involved with the center in the first place, because I drove by it and saw the sign and thought, huh, what is that? And began to investigate and started taking classes. This is a fantastic apartment in terms of light and space. It's on 3 floors, but it is an apartment. And so I'm limited in where I can be. I used to sew in a different corner of my living room, but everything got better when a friend who's a designer was over, and I actually had one small problem I wanted him to solve. I had a bunch of stuff crammed in a corner, and I said, Steph, can you help me figure out a solution here? And as designers will do, he said, well, first of all, your dining table's in the wrong place. Secondly, your rug is terrible. You need a new couch. You need to move your sewing machine. So the next thing I knew, I had rearranged my entire living room. But he was exactly right, because where I'm sitting right now is really a much better place for all of this to be. So I moved the sewing machine over to where the dining table had been. And I am currently sitting at this fantastic, what I call a command center, which unfortunately will not really show well on the screen. But if you can sort of see here what's going on, it's right in front of me is the sewing machine, which is set down into the table, which is counter height. And that's important because we do a lot of stuff standing as sewers, or sewists, as the word is currently come into vogue. And so there's a lot of stuff I need to stand up to do, like cutting and ironing. So this is waist height. Behind the sewing machine is a flap that comes up. It can go, this whole thing can kind of fold down to sort of a credenza sized piece of furniture, but that comes up and that's a cutting surface. There's a big giant cutting mat over there. And for those of you who are bookbinders, you may be amused by this. I certainly was, that bookbinders work on the same cutting mats that quilters do, but quilters are told never to use the lines on the mat to measure what it is that they're doing. And when I first started taking bookbinding classes and realized that everyone is measuring according to the lines on the mat in a much more precise way than the quilters are, because they're working in millimeters, not in quarters of inches. I thought that was funny, but that's the quilters rule, is that you're supposed to use only the lines on a ruler. And we use different rulers. We use rulers. This is not a very wide one. This is 3 inches. Usually I use 6-inch wide rulers, but these are very well calibrated and marked. And this one has a nice kind of non-stick surface on the back, so it doesn't slide. This cutting or this command center has another leaf that is what the computer is sitting on, and there's one behind me. Those are very useful for staging pieces that are going into the sewing machine, and also when I'm quilting on a big quilt, because it takes up a lot of room. It's a place for it to sit, and it can be balanced on the table before it goes under the sewing machine. Behind me, or in front of me actually, is what is affectionately known as, I'm going to turn it around, you can see it. This is called the elephant cabinet. And it's called the elephant cabinet because my niece, who is not as young as you might think to name something an elephant cabinet, she's, see, how old is she now? I think she's 27. And she named this when she was 25. She just thought it was so big, like it would be an elephant cabinet, but that's a storage area. It's got some tables that drop down, which is also useful for staging things. And so that's another, but it's mainly storage. I got a lot of thread in there, got some projects in progress there. And then my absolute favorite part of this whole setup is the bathroom, which is right here, and is the ironing station. So I was working in this location for some number of months and was frustrated because I didn't have a place to iron. And there is a, you can see there's a table that drops down from the elephant cabinet. I was ironing on there. I have another ironing board upstairs. I have a lot of irons too. That's another problem. I have probably 7 or 8 irons in addition to all the sewing machines, because there's a need for different iron for different purposes. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get a little table and I'll see if I can work on that. And I first had that outside the bathroom, and then I thought, wait, I could put that in the bathroom. And then that worked out. And then I realized, wait a second, I could get a gigantic ironing board. That thing is probably 6 feet long. It is 2 feet, maybe 2.5 feet wide. It is also waist height, so very comfortable to iron on. And it has extended my sewing space by quite a bit. And you can see the fancy iron that I have in there too, which is really an amazing thing. Most home irons these days do not get really that hot. And this is sort of a semi-professional kind of iron. It has a boiler. That's that big tank. It fills with water, and then prodigious amounts of steam come out of the iron itself and gets very, very hot. And it's really an excellent iron. So I now have a really fantastic ironing station there. So very excited about that. So now I'm going to show my little set of pictures here. Actually, before I do that, I had since my mother's on, she'll appreciate this too. So she was at my house maybe 15 years ago and commented about how much stuff there was everywhere. At the time, it was yarn, not fabric. And I wasn't even really seeing it anymore, but it was time to get it out of the visible locations in the house and put it behind cabinets. So now I have lots and lots of things that are behind doors and behind drawers or in drawers, and stored all over the house, because there is not enough room right where I am. But the problem with having stuff stored all over your house and having it go into those locations incrementally is you can't find anything. And I was tired of lying in bed thinking, I wonder what happened to X. And I would leave myself notes all the time about where was this particular thing and I find X, find Y. And I was tired of doing that. So a couple of years ago, I engaged in a massive effort to catalog every single craft supply in my apartment. And I have a 15-page list on the desktop of my computer that I revise every time I move something or add something somewhere, so I can find everything in the house. So now I'm going to show you some of these closets and cabinets and a couple of things that I'm working on. So share the screen, and let's hope that I can. Uh-oh. Well, don't know how to get this out of the way. There we go. Okay. So, and I have no explanation for why these pictures, which I took yesterday, look like they were taken in the 1960s. This is my 3rd floor. These baskets all have fabric storage, and the quilts on the top were not all made by me, some were. And that's actually my work desk in the front. That's where I'm working these days. This is opposite the work desk. This is all craft books. This is storage of projects, more storage of projects, same also on the 3rd floor. This is the 2nd floor. This is yarn and knitting, half finished knitting projects. This is a view of the window, and those IKEA cabinets down there all contain craft supplies and fabric. This is a quilt that I made recently using some hand-dyed indigo shibori fabric. It's my first effort to design something using hand-dyed, naturally dyed fabric, and pretty excited about it and about to do another one. This is a This is a quilt that was all made the small pieces there are all little yo-yos, which you'll see in a minute. And those were all made by hand and then sewn down by hand. And then all the blocks were put together on the sewing machine. But there are 564 of those little yo-yos in that quilt. And I loved making them. It was just very relaxing, very soothing, fun. Those are all Liberty of London fabrics for people who know fabric. And there's I don't know why that showed up, but there we go. There's a close up of one of the blocks. So those are the little yo-yos. It's basically a gather. This is something I'm working on now for one of my sisters. It's a paper pieced quilt, which means that it is sewn onto a piece of fabric or onto a piece of paper, actually, as a foundation, which is how you're able to get all those weird angles and weird shapes. It's a very old technique. And when you see antique quilts made this way, you often find pieces of newspaper still left in the quilt as the foundation for it. And you can see that is the block with the foundation on the back. Now it's just purchased newsprint, but we use a very lightweight paper to get that done. And that is my little set of pictures. And now I'm back. And I think, Cheryl, if we had questions, we can do questions.
We do. One question is, what textile skills translate to making books or to the book arts?
That's a really good question. And I think I have taken a lot of book arts classes, and I think a lot of it translates. The sense of precision, the attention to detail. Obviously, we're working with book cloth that is fabric, but wanting to make sure that you're getting things even and neatly done, I think translates perfectly well. Also, a sense of color and design. Some of that is innate, some of that is learned, but I certainly get that out of bookbinding classes as much as I do out of the textile work. Also sewing, obviously. I mean, we do a lot of sewing and bookbinding, and I'm very comfortable with a needle and thread in my hand. So even though it's a very different kind of sewing, I was not uncomfortable, or I didn't find that challenging when I first started doing that.
Okay, well, I have a new challenge for you. You can turn your some of your projects into book cloth and make a book.
That's occurred to me.
Okay, and next question is, what are your current influences in your textiles, and what influences did you gain through the COVID experience?
I would say my influences have been for a very long time traditional quilts. Even despite what I showed and the examples of my work, I'm very inspired by antique quilts. I really love them. And my favorite thing to do is to take a traditional quilt pattern and use modern fabrics to do it. And that's one of the things that I'm planning to do with my hand dyes. I just got some indigo here. And oh, one other thing I wanted to say about this, I've got some red ones too. When I first started doing this work, I was doing it only in blue, and I showed some to my mother. She's featuring prominently in this presentation here. And she said, "Do they only come in blue?" And I said, "Well, these only come in blue," but I obviously thought that was a great idea. So I've now done a lot of shibori work in madder, in this red, in logwood purple. It's beautiful, in various shades of yellow. So I want to use some of that and make a log cabin quilt, which is a very traditional quilt pattern. I would say I've gotten more inspired to do the natural dyeing during COVID, because I've got a kitchen, just a few steps away from me, and it's very easy to do the dyeing while I'm at home because it does take a long time. There's long periods of time for things to simmer or to sit, and it's harder to do that when you're leaving the house or traveling around the country, which is what I did pre-COVID.
Yeah. So next question that has to do with that is what's the furthest you've traveled to a workshop?
The furthest I've traveled to a workshop. Well, I've taken a couple of trips that included workshops. So and since that was part of the inspiration for the trips, I would say Korea, maybe the furthest, India, maybe close second. But for a real workshop where that was the plan, was just the workshop, France.
Nice. Somebody else asked, do you ever expect to move? Just kidding. What a layout you have created to support your passion.
Believe me, there was a time when I used to dream of a 2,000 square foot sewing room so that everything would be right there with me. But I have to say, COVID has taught me a really good lesson because if you had asked me pre-COVID, would I think my apartment was too small or too big, or not too big, but would I think it was small or big after I had not left it for 15 months? I would have said, oh, I would have felt trapped and it was small. But I have 1,400 square feet, which is a lot of space for one person. I agree. But I actually feel like it's bigger because I use every bit of it now. And I mean, my bathroom ironing station is one example of it, but there's a lot of examples of that. So yeah, no, I'm pretty well set up here.
Also, there's a question. Have you had a chance to see the Rosie Lee Tompkins exhibit, the quilts at the BAM PFA yet?
I have not, and I really want to go because I've heard they're really spectacular. I have a friend who's gone.
Great. Anybody else have any questions? Everyone's saying wonderful organization, envious of how well organized all your supplies are. I have a question for you. What is one of the next workshops you'd like to take at the San Francisco Center for the Book?
Well, that's a good question. I do have my eye on the Making Your Own Book Cloth workshop that's at the end of June, because that is something that I've wanted to learn how to do. And also, I was very tantalized by the 19th century aspect of it. So anything historical that we can bring into the present time is appealing to me.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add regarding creativity? Because I know you and I talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I feel it's funny because people react to me as a creative person when they see the things that I do. And I don't feel like a creative person. I think because I tend to I use patterns. I follow patterns for the most part. I've made up a couple of things myself, but for the most part, I'm a pattern sewer and a recipe cook. But there is a lot of room for creativity in that. I feel like I have a pretty good innate sense of color and how to combine things. And that I think is what makes my work uniquely mine, because those are the inspirations that I draw from.
Oh, and there's one last question. They want you to talk about your other collection, like the teapots behind you.
Yeah, the teapots are good. I am a huge tea fan. People who think that the coffee world is like the height of, snobism have never drunk tea because boy, is there a lot of snobism in tea, and you can spend piles of money on tea, which I do not do, but I do love teapot. I mean, they're just beautiful little designs. I have quite a bit of stuff on the walls. Behind me is a photograph, and oh gosh, now I'm just why am I forgetting his name? He's a very famous Japanese photographer. I have a lot of photography. I do have some painting, but mostly photography. And so I guess that's a collection. I have a big fabric collection. I think that's really a collection more than something that I use. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for spending the afternoon with us and sharing your lovely, lovely creative space. And thank you everybody for attending. Just to let you know, our next exhibition coming up is called Reclamation, starts June 4th. And when that exhibition is up, we'll be taking appointments to see the show. So for more information, check out our website at sfcb.org and have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank
Oh,
you.
and our next Shelter in Studio is June 3rd with Mary Marsh, Quite Contrary Press. So join us then. Take care.